Alrighty.
Hi, this is Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the Future of Education. Tonight really is the future. It is Thursday, July 2010, and we have special guests today. We have Lucas Gillespie and Peggy Sheehy. Welcome to both of you.
Oh, thanks so much, Steve. It's great to be here. Our whole guild is represented here, and future guildies.
Awesome. I know I've been just struggling to even understand any of this pre-show chat. The Future of Education is sponsored by Illuminate, my employer. The project I work on for Illuminate is learncentral.org. We hope you'll come. It's a social network for educators with Illuminate baked in. We think it's a lot of fun. The Global Education Conference is coming up in November the 15th to 19th, 5 days, multiple time zones, multiple languages, multiple tracks, and all free. Hope you'll put that on your calendars. It should be a lot of fun. Coming up on the Future of Education, next Wednesday, August 4th, Marcelo Rodriguez on lifelike pedagogy, and Marcelo is in the audience tonight. Welcome, Marcelo. Milton Chen from Edutopia on Education Nation. On the 10th, Charles Fidel on the neuroscience of learning. On the 12th, a unique guest, David Wood, wrote a book called Get Paid for Who You Are, that I think is sort of a harbinger of what employment will be like. Carol Dweck from Stanford on the 19th on her great book, Mindset. Kathleen Cushman on Fires in the Mind. BYU Idaho Learning Model. We learned about it. Anya Kamenitz's book, DIYU. Lots more fun coming up. Hope you'll find something of value to you. If you've missed the show, last night's show on creating democratic learning communities, that recording is up, as are all of the others. Lawrence Peters last week on global education, Jim Bach on unschooling, self-education and passion. Lots of other great shows. Hope, again, there's something there that's worthwhile to you. If this is your first time in Illuminate, it is a participative environment. We hope you'll use the emoticons down at the bottom, smiley face, clapping hand. Let us know how you're feeling. If you would like to ask a question, and there will be lots of that tonight, you can use the larger icon with a hand and the green up arrow. That raises your hand, and we will give you the microphone. If you think you're going to ask a question using the microphone, do go up to Tools, Audio, run the Audio Setup Wizard to make sure your mic is configured correctly. You can put notes in the chat to everybody. You can put notes in the chat to specific individuals using the drop-down box, but do remember that those private chat messages are seen by the moderators, so Lucas, Peggy, and I will be treated to whatever private messages you send to each other. It does help to see the chat if you go up to View Layouts and switch to Wide Layout. View Layouts and switch to Wide Layout, and that will help you see the chat a little bit better. Okay, your first chance to participate. To the left of the map, you'll see a wand, a laser pointer wand. A wand with a red star at the end. Click on that, click on the map, and let us know where you're listening from. You can also shout it out in the chat. Fun to know where it is, what time it is maybe, and if you're in sweltering heat, you can complain. Okay, there's Marcelo in Brazil. Looks like Japan. So again, wherever you're listening from, we're sure glad that you're spending some time with us tonight or today, depending on what time zone you're in. And if you're listening to the recording, thanks for tuning us in. Okay, so I've really been looking forward to tonight. Lucas and Peggy, and in part because I feel like I'm just going to learn a ton. This is a world I know very little about. The extent of my knowledge of these games comes from a web show called The Guild, and that's about all I really know. And I am hoping that you're going to make a case tonight for a better understanding from educators of the value of these games and your specific activities and the things that you've been doing that you feel really are part of a larger educational story. So shall we start by having each of you kind of give a short bio of yourselves?
Sure, I'll start. This is Peggy. whose voice is a little bit different than Lucas, so you should be able to differentiate. I am the media specialist, instructional technology facilitator at Suffolk Middle School in Rockland County, New York. We're about a half hour north of New York City. And I am relatively new to gaming. Most of my exploration with virtual worlds and immersive environments in education was in Second Life and other MUVEs. I'm only about 3 years into MMORPGs, so I very often bow to Lucas's expertise since he's much more of a seasoned gamer than I. But I'm going to let Lucas introduce himself now, and then we'll get into the saga that is CogDis and WoW in School.
Thanks, Peggy. Yeah, this is Lucas Gillespie, and I am an instructional technology coordinator in southeastern North Carolina in a rural school district called Pender County Schools. And I have been in education for just over 10 years. Actually, this will start year number 12 coming up. So previously worked as a high school science teacher and did that for about 7 years before taking a regional position doing technology staff development and technology integration in the classroom.
Awesome. Well, I think, and Lucas, we're going to make this like any other conversation that you and I have, so just, shut me up when you need to and jump in when you need to, and I'll try to come up for air now and then. But before we actually get into the WoW in School project, I'd like to tell you briefly as possible, my history with World of Warcraft. And really, I attribute this to two people. One is Catherine Parsons, who is Victoria and our guild master. She is also the assistant superintendent for instruction in the Pine Plains School District here in New York. And Catherine and I were both very active in Second Life, and we were both ISTE docents, and very often our conversations would turn to kids and education and engagement. And we noticed that very often in multiple conversations, World of Warcraft would come up, and Catherine actually had a friend who brought her into World of Warcraft, and then she invited about 12 or 15 of us from Second Life to go over and migrate into World of Warcraft and investigate it, and that's how CogDis was born. I'm using the abbreviation. The name of the guild is Cognitive Dissonance. So for those of you who need to have your memories jarred a little bit to remember that term, that's the idea of holding two conflicting ideas simultaneously, cognitive dissonance. And we thought that was an appropriate name for a guild that was going to be a guild of educators, and really our mantra is that we are learning to game to learn. So we're really just trying to find the educational value and credibility in these off-the-shelf, massively multiplayer online role-playing games. So that was about 2.5 years ago. I now believe the guild has upwards of 250 members, many of whom are here tonight, which is really cool. We're very international, so regardless of what crazy time of the night you log in, there's usually 2 or 3 people on from some time zone. Primarily we're the Eastern Hemisphere, Western Hemisphere rather, and across the country. So we have quite a representation from Australia. We have some folks from UK, and it's very cool. And we'll be giving you the information later about the Cognitive Dissonance Guild if you're so inclined to roll a tune and join us. You don't have to be a seasoned gamer. You can know nothing and come in the way we did 2.5 years ago. Or if you are an advanced gamer, already have some background with World of Warcraft, you want to move a tune over to CogDis, or you want to roll a new one, we absolutely welcome you. Lucas, I'm coming up for air.
Yeah, okay. Well, I can give you a little bit about my background and how I got started in this arena. I grew up typical child of the 80s with an Atari 2600 in my hand as soon as I could hold it, and migrated from there to Commodore 64, and then just kept on with gaming, and mostly console and computer-based gaming as I went into college. And it was I think it was my second year of teaching, around 2001, that a student approached me one day in class when I was teaching physical science and said, Mr. Gillespie, I know you are into fantasy literature and you like R.A. Salvatore and authors like that, and I know you like games. Why don't you give this game EverQuest a try? And so it was there. I ended up picking it up on a whim one evening I think it was at Walmart or somewhere like that. So I ended up picking it up, and I joined him on the server that he was playing on, and then he and I, he kind of taught me. The role was reversed there, and he taught me a lot about that. And of course, completely immersed, completely just engrossed in the game world and that environment. So many brain buzzes as I was participating, just watching the kinds of things that were going on and realizing everything from the subculture of the players to the game mechanics to the virtual environment, just totally blown away. And so I've been playing these kind of games ever since. In fact, I've tried console gaming and other types of games, but I always come back to, always end up coming back to the MMO genre because I'm just so enthralled with the social aspects of the game.
So Peggy, I don't want to oversimplify Jim G's message about gaming, but is yours pretty much in line with that, which is that these games are really well designed to keep people's attention and to help them to learn to go from stage to stage?
Well, that's fascinating to start with, Steve, because that's exactly what we were trying to find out when we went into World of Warcraft and started playing. And the remarkable thing that we kept observing was, oh my gosh, this is scaffolded learning. This is constructivism at its finest. The way this game is designed, not only is it clever and ingenious and gets you to read and gets you to research, but it's social. And so much of what is substantial in education today and imperative in education today is that social aspect, that participatory culture. And MMORPGs support this to the max. But I mean, I can remember being like a very beginning, like level 7, level 8, and reading a quest and going out to resources to help me with it and speaking to other guild members who had done it previously and you know, with that teacher lens on, it was just like, oh, why can't school be like this? Why can't school be like this? Why do I want to keep coming back? Because I'm just at the edge of comfortability. Nothing is too hard or too easy. It keeps me interested, it keeps me engaged, it keeps me wanting to try harder and never to give up. And I'm just going to throw a link in right now for folks to see. We're absolutely not going to watch this, but I definitely want people to have this link. So that they can go back to it at another time. It's a recent TED Talk where Jane McGonigal puts up a darn good argument for gaming making a better world. And she addresses a lot of what happens with the gaming personality, with that we're not raising a generation, and we can talk about this later, but it looks like we'd be preaching to the choir with this audience. But we're not, in fact, raising a generation of kids who are violent or kids who are sitting in the basement in the dark and not socially minded and not civically minded. But we're raising a generation that potentially could solve all the problems of the world if we can harness that attitude, that gaming attitude, that never give up, that epic win, I know I can do it kind of attitude, and bring it out into the real world.
So I think one of the interesting, again, the caveat here is that this is not an area that I know a whole lot about, but I end up hearing people kind of give pushback. And one of the concerns I hear is that people will say, what if these worlds become more attractive than real life? I mean, if I'm working at Walmart, or my school is boring, and the world becomes so attractive that I'm more interested in being there. Does that end up playing out at all, or is that a false fear?
You guys, what do you think, Lucas? Because I have very definite opinions about that.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and I think it was one of the speakers that I heard recently was talking about that potential, and I think one of the things that we need to look at is what is it about someone's real life that in comparison would make the game world so much more compelling. And again, that harkens back to McGonigal's talk, where we need to look at harnessing that potential, that environment that games produce, and pushing it into the real world. And that's been my experiences as a classroom teacher. I had students who played World of Warcraft with me, and they would, they were kind of quiet, average students in the class, and some of them were, and yet in the evenings they were emerging as leaders, leading 25 to 40 people in a very complex raid type situation. And if you're not familiar with what a raid is where you get a large group of people, typically 25 to 40 folks together, and you work through a very complex dungeon or to achieve some kind of complex goal in the game world. It requires a lot of leadership. It requires a lot of micromanaging. And these kids who would sit in my classroom very quietly or just sort of unassuming average kid from southeastern North Carolina is emerging as a leader in this world. And my question is, what is it about that empowers that kid there to do that? How can I empower that kid in the school to do the same kinds of things and to tackle real-world problems? And I think that's what McGonigal was getting at in her video. If we can harness that, we can make the real world as compelling
Precisely.
as the game world.
We've really never had this conversation, this particular aspect of this conversation before, so I can see that we're on the same page with it. And really, Steve, the proof is in the pudding, and that pudding happened in my school last year. We're going to kind of segue a little bit now into the WOW in School project. But when Lucas and I met at Games Learning Society at the University of Madison, what was it, 2 years ago, Lucas? Two, I don't remember.
Two.
But anyway, thank you. We started fooling around with this whole idea, and Lucas said, I think I'm going to try it as an after-school club. And I thought, you know what, I could probably get that to fly. And, we could talk about the specifics of how we tackle the costs and things like that. But basically, in my school, and my principal, Brian Fox, is actually in the session with us tonight. He's also in the guild, so it's pretty awesome. I didn't have too much of a battle when I went to him and said I want to start a World of Warcraft club for after school. But for the teachers in the audience, that the after school is the gateway. You do it after school, you get your evidence to support that it's a strong pedagogical tool, and then you bring it to the mainstream. So last year, we had just enough money from some money that the kids in my tech club had won, and the PTA kind of stepped up and helped us out a little bit, that we were able to get 13 World of Warcraft accounts and game cards for the duration of the school year. So knowing that I could only have this small group of kids, I actually gave it some thought, and I knew that Lucas was choosing at-risk, identifying as at-risk population. And funny, I took that information, and in my head that translated as the kids who had IEPs, the kids who maybe had some emotional difficulties, maybe the kids who had social problems in school. And I went to the school psychologist, who is also in the guild, Dr. Fishkin. And I went to the school social workers, and I said, let's get a list of all the kids, and here's how I put it to them. I said, that don't have a tribe. The kids that don't play an instrument, the kids that aren't in a sport, the kids that don't work on the yearbook, the kids that have nothing to do after school, the kids that are kind of, walk around school alone with their head down. We generated a list, and I sent home a parent information letter, which is on the WOW in School page if you go to the sidebar. And I presented it this way with the help of my team at school. I presented it in a very positive light, not your child has been identified as an at-risk student, but your child has been identified as a student who would greatly benefit from the next exciting project at Suffolk Middle School, World of Warcraft. And gave the parents some basic information about why we were doing it, what we thought the benefits would be, and then when the kids came back and showed interest, we sent home a parental permission slip, and we were off to the races. So the kids I chose, I call them the A-team. They were all the Asperger's, the ADHD, the autistic, the kids who just, they just didn't really seem to fit in anywhere. And I interviewed the kids at the end of the year, asking them four very simple questions. What did you like about World of Warcraft? What could be better about it? What kind of learning has occurred? What have you learned? And do you want to participate next year? And I interviewed the kids by themselves in the room next to where the rest of them were playing. So they didn't hear each other's answers. And every single one of them said, I've learned how to be more social. I've learned how to communicate better. I've learned some leadership skills. I've learned some teamwork. I've learned, and some of them got real specific, I've learned not to say some stuff and to say stuff at more appropriate times. I've learned how to work through disagreements. I mean, the list went on and on and on. And then I said, well, what did you learn that a teacher might appreciate, that might be connected to a school quote-unquote curriculum? I've learned how to use maps and map skills. I've learned time management. I've learned tons of math. I've learned tons of vocabulary. I'm reading and writing more. So not only do we see it as a viable tool to use with this kind of a at-risk community of kids, but, I mean, go grab it for your gifted and talented. Grab it for your reading, the kids that need support in reading. Grab it as an ESL tool. I mean, the list goes on and on. I mean, I think everybody should play it, but that's me. Lucas, talk a little bit about your group of kids.
Yeah, okay. So being that I'm not based at a particular school, it was a little challenging. I didn't have really any firsthand knowledge of the kids who ended up participating in our program. What I told the principal, well, I went and met with the principal, Edie Skipper. She's an incredible principal. She's doing a really good job, and in fact, she has started picking up and playing World of Warcraft as well. So it's kind of interesting how that works. But she and I met and talked about it, and we also met with the teacher at the school who is kind of heading up the program there, Craig Lawson. Craig also plays World of Warcraft. In fact, that's how he and I met, and he ended up moving to this part of the country and getting a job in our school system. So that worked out very nice as well. But Edie and Craig and I sat down and we talked about what kind of students we're looking for in this program, and wanted to bring in students who kind of just didn't fit in anywhere. You know, they weren't necessarily involved in sports, they didn't have some club that they were active in, and they needed something to anchor them in school. And a lot of them were students who had been sort of identified as this is the sort of kid that we see dropping out by the time they reach 16 in high school. So those were the kind of kids we wanted to target and give them something to anchor them in school. And so the principal and Craig kind of went through the list of potential students, and we kind of talked about what would be involved in the program and that kind of thing, and that's how those selections were made. And again, just incredible outcomes. I mean, these kids who typically, you know, are the kids who are attendance issues, kids who didn't want to come to school, were literally running down the hall to the media center at the end of the day. And that was an encouraging thing because they wanted to be there, they wanted to participate, and they were so anxious to log in and get started with what we were doing during the day. So a lot of similarities in what Peggy and I saw, even though it played out kind of differently.
Yeah, I actually had in my interviews, and I do have those interviews on film that I'm going to be publishing soon. I'm just waiting for a couple of permissions. But one student actually said, you know, this is the only reason I come to school, because at Suffering we made a rule that if you're not in school, you can't show up at the club. So I actually had one student say that. Another student said, you know, actually, when I first heard about this, I thought it was going to be kind of lame because it pertained to school, and most things in school are pretty lame, but it was really awesome.
So Peggy, we're getting some interesting feedback in the chat. A couple of people are asking specifically, can we stop and describe what World of Warcraft is and how it works for those who don't have any familiarity with it?
Sure. Actually, I'm going to defer to Lucas because I think he's had this conversation more times than I. It will be more coherent.
Sure. I'll give that a stab.
Yeah,
so World of Warcraft, and I have, by the way, let me pause and just do a shout out. I have at least two former students maybe three former students that are in the room tonight that just somehow or another got word that I was doing this either through Twitter or Facebook or something. And so both WoW players, all of them are WoW players. I'm so excited that they're here, and I'm going to defer to their expertise when I mess up some of this stuff. So guys, Trip, Plumperot, Corey, if I mess this up, correct me. But if I'm not mistaken, Blizzard launched World of Warcraft in the end of the year 2004, and so it's been around for almost 6 years now, and it's a persistent virtual world. It's fantasy based, or what some folks call high fantasy. So it's based off your typical dragons and knights and dwarves and chivalry and those sorts of things. Yeah, very similar to Second Life in the sense that you take on the role of an avatar moving in a three-dimensional space.
Yeah, at that point,
however, different from Second Life, Bruce.
Yeah, there you go. That's what I wanted you to make sure you clarified that right off. The difference between Second Life, and so many things were crystallized for me when I entered WoW. The main difference for someone new to gaming between something like Second Life and World of Warcraft is that Second Life is a user-created experience in the sense that all the content is user-created. You go in there and go in there to function as whatever, as a teacher, as an artist, as a builder, as a whatever. In WoW, there's what's known as a game engine, which means that the experience, the basic game experience, the leveling up, the fights, the raids, all these things are built into the game, and yet there's enough flexibility within the interface that you also have this great social collaboration, so all sorts of other stuff is happening besides the actual playing the game. Okay, can you pick up where you left off, Lucas, now that I interrupted you?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, exactly what Peggy said there too. So you're taking part in a story world. The best analogy I could come up with would be, imagine if you have read Tolkien's Lord of the Rings books or have even seen the movies. Imagine you are just one of the extras in the back, but you've got your own story. You're playing your own role in that storyline. That's very similar to the way that World of Warcraft works. In fact, there is Lord of the Rings Online, so you could actually get a very first-hand experience of that. And so this game has been around since 2004. They have expanded the game twice and soon 3 times, so which means they've added new content, new storyline, new developments in the storyline. We saw the emergence of the Outlands, where the sort of dimensional, this place that existed somewhere else in space was opened up, a door between the world of Azeroth, which is the world that this takes place in, and there. Then in the next expansion we saw the rise of the Lich King, who is a sort of really evil, sort of undead former prince who has fallen from good and glory and has kind of went to the dark side, corrupted by power, and so that opened up a new continent to explore and new challenges. And soon, hopefully this year, we're going to see the 3rd expansion called Cataclysm, which is going to completely shake the foundations of the planet and kind of tear the old world apart and create all kinds of new experiences for the players as well. As a player, you start out at level 1. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, sure, and please, but I just want to make sure that, so for those who are listening, what kind of hardware requirements are there to be involved in World of Warcraft?
That's a good question. It will run on both the PC and the Mac. So there is a Mac client and a PC client available, and I do think folks get it to run on other platforms as well, like Linux with a little trickery, things like Wine and those sorts of things. As far as the hardware requirements go, of course, the faster and the newer your computer, probably the better results you're going to get. However, we're able to run it, and this was the first challenge before I even considered doing this project in our school system, was will it run on a typical Dell lab computer? And in fact, it does. And it runs very well and playable. And this is just a basic integrated graphics card, I think 1 gig of RAM. Out of machine, and it runs very playable. So a credit to the game designers, their efficiency in programming and that sort of thing. It does really well.
So I did interrupt you. Go ahead.
The site I just posted, Steve, is from Henry Jenkins. It's an essay that Henry wrote, Reality Bites, 8 Myths About Video Games Debunked. And he goes through all the classic things that people will respond to that have not played and have not learned personally to see the value in this, about video games. Talking about things like, video games have been used to train soldiers to kill, so why don't they have the same impact on the kids who play them? Or video games are not a meaningful form of expression, or it's socially isolating or desensitizing. And Henry basically gets in there and gets the facts and the research, and I mean, some of his research is from the Department of Education, etc., and just really puts it out on the table, because I noticed there was a conversation. I'm trying to keep up with the chat. There's a conversation about, what about the kids who are going to get addicted? Well, what about the kids who are going to get, addicted to Legos or addicted to, if you have an addictive personality, you're probably going to get addicted. So what we need to do is address that by saying, okay, we had that discussion with my kids. What's a healthy amount of time to play? Now, my kids only played 2 hours after school every day with me. I had the logins, I had the passwords, they were not playing from home, etc. Half of them said that they were asking for this as their next birthday present or their next, big gift or whatever, because they wanted to play more than that. But they were all playing other games at home. And people ask me, how can you spend 3 or 4 hours a night playing World of Warcraft? And they say, well, most people spend 3 or 4 hours a night watching television, or whatever it is your hobby is. This is it, and it's social. I'm in there with my friends. That's where I hang out with my friends.
Yeah, it totally beats The Bachelorette. I'm just saying.
So I remember talking about social networks 3 years ago and having people say, how could they possibly have value? And now we see, the value of social networks, especially for professional development and amongst educators. It is, and if I go to speak to an audience now and ask people to raise their hand, how many of them are members of Facebook? It's the overwhelming majority. Are we going to see the same kind of acceptance of these games, do you think, over the next couple of years? Are some of these questions going to get resolved through cultural dialogue, and will we see increased acceptance in the same way that we've seen with social networking?
I believe so. I mean, 5 years ago when I was traveling around conferences presenting about education and Second Life, it was no man's land. Nobody had heard of it. And now it's kind of like, oh yeah, it's well accepted, and people are familiar with it, and it's no longer this out of the box kind of thing. And I think the same thing. I think there's been a movement for quite some time about games for education, but they just, in my humble opinion, those games that specifically touted for education have just fallen short of the mark. And I know why they've fallen short of the mark. They don't have the multi-billion-dollar business behind them that Blizzard has or these other major game companies have. But you can't ask a kid who's playing World of Warcraft or Halo or even Grand Theft Auto, you can't ask them to come from that rich, lush experience and go into this rinky-dink little game that somebody presents to them as an educational game. So what my big vision is to get these major game corporations a little bit. I mean, Blizzard's not going to wrap their game engine around our social studies curriculum. That's not going to happen. But we can find the social studies curriculum or connections to it or support of it inside World of Warcraft. And until such time as something comes down the pike that is as rich and lustrous as these multi-billion-dollar games that have millions of people playing and paying a subscription every month, I'm going to use what I can get my hands on. And right now I can get my hands on World of Warcraft, and I see the learning that goes on.
There are a couple of questions here about age, the legal age to play, and also concerns about youth playing with adults, and is that societally okay? Here,
let me tell you my experience. I had the option of blocking. There's something in World of Warcraft known as trade chat. We should see some comments in the webinar chat now, but trade chat can get pretty raunchy. Trade chat is, anybody saying anything they feel like saying, and you can keep filters on or whatever. And I had the option of turning the filters on or totally blocking the trade chat, and I left it open. And I left it open because I thought we're going to have some aha moments. We're going to have some learning opportunities here. And, you know, nothing fazed them. There was nothing that made anybody uncomfortable. You know, I played with them all the time, so I was reading whatever they read. And every once in a while, I'd see something in Trade Chat and think, oh, this is going to start a conversation or something, and you know, kind of rolled off them. Now, I did tell my kids that, you know, we went over good digital citizenship and online safety and things like that, that, you know, no real information goes out, not even your age or anything like that. So once in a while, one of my students would say to me, hey, Miss Sheehy, somebody just asked me how old I am, and I would, you know, would say, well, you know the rules, so, you know, you just tell them you don't share that information. And they got that down to a science, they got that pretty solid. But on the positive side of playing with adults, I presented out this summer. I presented out at ISTE kind of an impromptu World of Warcraft. Dean Groom had a session that was a roundtable, and he just kind of said, you know what, you need to talk about this. So we did a last minute, you know, shout it out to the social network that that's what the topic of the roundtable was going to be. And we had about 40, 50 people in the room, and I just showed a few of the slides about WOW in school and started the conversation. And this young girl, this 13, almost 13-year-old, was there with her mom at the conference. And she raised her hand and she stood up and she said, I've been playing World of Warcraft since I was 7. And she said, and she went through this whole, I couldn't have written a better speech. She said, I've learned this and this and this and this and this, and she was talking about math and science. She did her science fair project based on stuff in World of Warcraft. She did her math projects based on stuff in World of Warcraft. But then the audience was intrigued by this young girl talking, and she was very poised and confident. And her mother later said, you know, that poise and that confidence came from playing this game. She said, I don't at all filter her. I don't, you know, she knows. I said to somebody in the audience, pardon me, said to her, do people you play with know how old you are? And she said, no, I don't share that information. Like she looks at them like, what, are you crazy? You know, no, everybody knows that kind of thing. But she went on and on to say, I said, well, do you know how old the people are in your guild? Because she belonged to a guild. And she said, I have no idea. I assume half of them are adults and some of them aren't adults. And I said, do you ever lead raids? And she said, oh, yeah, all the time. So this 12-year-old kid, almost 13, is in a guild, and she's running these very complex, very, very complex raids of 10, 25 people, which means that she's basically giving direction, stepping back when the team knows what to do. She's basically setting the pace, suggesting alternative approaches. She's running the show. Where is this 12-year-old going to get that experience anywhere else?
So I'm going to harken back to something Lucas said, which is there's an interesting little kind of full circle that this brings us around to. If we're not providing those opportunities in our students and our children's regular lives, then of course this is going to be very attractive to them. And in many ways, I think it'd be interesting to kind of tell the story of will this kind of activity and others sort of radically change teenagers, teen years, because they will demand and should demand to have more participation in the things that they do.
I hope so. I hope that's
so
one
I
of the
was going
outcomes.
to say the same thing. I think
should be.
What it is, it creates a situation where students have to, and hopefully respectfully, but have to demand more out of their education and out of their experiences, and hopefully they will create more. And I think we see some of that emerging through social media and the kind of trends that we see emerging in the online world anyway. When I'm not getting what I need, I will fill that gap or fill that need somehow or another. And I see that happening with students.
So where do we go from here? We've got about 20 minutes left. If there are questions, I think this is probably a good time to start fielding questions. You can do so by raising your hand using the icon of the hand with the green up arrow at the bottom of the participant window. And it looks like Matthew has a question. So Lucas and Peggy, can we move to Q&A? Is that okay with you?
Please, let's
Oh,
do.
sure. Some.
Just before we move to Q&A, just let me reinforce something with folks. The website that you see up with the World of Warcraft in School site, please come and join it. Even if you just lurk, we really want this to be a collaborative effort. Even if you don't have the opportunity to work with students in World of Warcraft at your school, you can still contribute curriculum or ideas or reflect or constructive criticism, and you can still certainly come in and join us in cognitive dissonance and play with us. Always a soap opera.
Okay, Matthew, go ahead.
Yeah.
So, Matthew, your mic isn't staying on.
Yeah,
there
can
you
you
go.
hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. I have a 1 point and then also a question. When I started playing massive multiplayer online role-playing games, you know, people talked about you meet online people that are terrible, and on the other hand, one thing that I was struck by was just how many generous people you meet in that community, and I just feel that the internet, even though it's poo-pooed by a large portion of the society, some of them, the older generation, some people who maybe don't use it a lot, they think that the internet's isolating and it causes people to be antisocial, but my experience has been largely good, that it helps, it gets rid of the inhibitions that keep people from being generous with one another. If I was sitting next to somebody at a bus stop, I wouldn't feel comfortable offering them some gum, but if I'm playing a game with them, I would, out of the blue, if I see somebody that needs some help, I might help them in a way that I wouldn't out in the real world. So that's the point that I wanted to make. And then the question I have is, I'm interested in the curricular ties to the game playing, because I love to play and I would really enjoy playing with the students. On the other hand, I would also like to feel that I am really clearly tying what we're doing to the curriculum. So could you talk maybe about how you tied what you did to the curriculum in your school?
Sure, I'd be glad to address that. A couple of things is from my point of view in the project this year, we were more informal. Running it as an after-school program, as was mentioned earlier, was sort of our foot in the door to get through a lot of logistical things to see if this was really possible and what it would begin to look like taking place in the public school environment. So the things we kind of worked on earlier was communication skills. Peggy did a great project with her students on communication skills. We looked at things like leadership. The students were they created their own guild. They voted on the guild name that they liked. They wrote stories about their characters, so it was creative writing pieces and things like that. And so that kind of opened up the doorway for next year, which I'm really excited about, but we have a tremendous amount of work to do, where we're actually going to be offering it as an elective that takes place during the school day as a language arts elective. And so right now, I'm in the process, and Peggy's helping out, and Craig Lawson and other folks are contributing to creating a 36-week course. And actually, we're developing it entirely in Moodle. And so the idea is then to take everything that we're doing in that course and align it to national standards and things like that. So pretty exciting stuff there. But we've hit on topics, everything ranging from environmental science and nature, to looking at cultures and comparing in-world cultures to real-world cultures, and lots of writing, lots of leadership types of things, lots of things focused on digital citizenship too. But all that's in the wiki though, so just jump in there. We have some great full-fledged lesson plans that were written by an educator here in North Carolina who unfortunately we're losing to Kansas, named Helga Brown. She's just incredible, kind of jumped in and really did a lot of groundwork there.
So that does raise a question. Cindy's saying, would you make the Moodle available? Is the PBWorks wiki site the best place for gathering together? Yeah, the PBWorks site's the best place for sort of the collaboration piece, and the purpose for using Moodle was to make it available to everyone so that we could package it up and people could modify it and do whatever they wanted to with it, adapt it to whatever curriculum that they were doing. Is there a Ning-like or social community for educators using World of Warcraft in schools?
I would say that the Cognitive Dissonance Guild is the best place to kind of make that connection, and then of course through the wiki. But we do not have a Ning set up at the time. There is in Facebook. There is a page devoted to the project in Facebook too, so you could look for that as well. And that could be there's a fairly good established group there. It's not very active. Most of the activity is taking place on the wiki, but that Facebook page could certainly be that point as well.
Seems like we should start a World of Warcraft group in Classroom 2.0, at least just to point people in the right directions for materials if they come looking. Hey, Lucy Barrow asked a question in the chat. She was interested to know how parents have reacted in terms of the fantasy and fantasy violence content.
Well, let me share with you my experience with that. First of all, my kids are 7th and 8th graders. I didn't have any negative parental responses whatsoever to the fantasy content. I think the content in WoW is pretty mild compared to the content on TV Friday nights. I really do. There's not graphic blood and guts the way there is in some MMORPGs. There's death and dying and fighting and raiding, but there's also questing and exploring and helping, and I'd say maybe a third of the quests have nothing to do with killing things. They have things to do with finding resources and locating and solving puzzles, and so it's not just about your armor and your gear and how buffed you are. It's also about how you can critically think and problem solve, and doing it all in a social context. I can't emphasize that enough. And I really want to, maybe Lucas, you can just type her name in there for me. I really want to steer people towards the work of Constance Steinkeeler from the University of Madison. She's been researching this whole teens and MMORPGs for quite a while, and she's done some fascinating research where she worked with 25 high school, 10th grade, I believe they were, boys. After school, every day for 2 years, they played World of Warcraft, and she, methodically, her research is all for her, doctoral work and what have you. So I mean, it's full tilt boogie, correctly done empirical research. But she basically, looked at the Lexile reading levels of a social studies textbook these kids had, and found a comparable World of Warcraft page, and tested them at the beginning of their gameplay, and a lot of them tested on like a 4th or 5th grade reading level. And then after 2 years, she retested them, and in the social studies text, their reading had only improved slightly, but in the World of Warcraft, and she actually took something from WoW Wiki, they were reading beyond college. Now, I brought this, I couldn't understand this. I brought this to my reading specialist at my school, and I said, explain this to me, is this really possible? And she said, absolutely. And she said, now you have to understand that their reading has improved so much, but it's genre specific. Meaning, they're reading in this one genre, that won't necessarily help them read the New York Times, but, it's going to help somewhat. So just looking at Constance's research, when I moved into the Moodle work with Lucas and looked at the Hero's Journey course, originally Lucas had proposed that his kids were going to probably read The Hobbit maybe, and then play World of Warcraft, and I looked at maybe reading The Hobbit and playing Lord of the Rings online. But then I talked to some more teachers, and it could really be any hero's journey kind of novel. It could be the Iliad. It could be, let the kids choose their book. And we can pull the literacy out and make those connections. And I'm not just talking about setting and characterization. I'm talking about real rich underlying themes that would lend themselves to profound discussion. I keep trying to stop and come up for air so I can let somebody else talk.
Well, I've got a couple of questions that have come up in the chat. One of which is cost. How much does it cost to own World of Warcraft?
Well, first off, you need to buy the software, and currently you can expect to pay, I think it's around $29.99 at Walmart for the World of Warcraft Battle Chest, which includes the basic game plus the first expansion, and that will get you allow you to level a character from level 1 to level 70. To add the Wrath of the Lich King expansions, another $29.99. And that will allow you to continue your character from level 70 to level 80 and open up a couple other options for you. And then you have the subscription fee, which averages about $15 a month unless you subscribe in larger chunks at a time. The way that we handled it, we purchased for students the World of Warcraft Battle Chest, so they could potentially level all the way up to level 70, and then we purchased, since we couldn't use a credit card for the school system, we purchased game subscription cards, which are 60-day cards, and they run about $30 a piece, and that we got enough of those to get through the year with the project.
And then
we approach it the same way, Steve.
Yeah.
You know, and we had some seed money from a contest the kids had won, and then the PTA chipped in some money, and we did it the same way with the game cards.
Okay, so another question, and this, Peggy, I think is particularly good for you, would be, and you may have talked about this at the beginning, but Lisa asks about virtual environments instead, and their use rather than World of Warcraft or these massive games.
Virtual environments in lieu of massively multiplayer online role-playing games?
I think that's what Lisa means. Yeah, she said instead. So, and I think you were saying sort of early on that the level of engagement, the fact that these aren't, that they're actually created and calculated for scaffolded learning, that they are a different experience in your perspective from a virtual environment.
Yeah, I'm looking and seeing Lisa's correcting us. Virtual environments includes WoW. But the difference is I'm still a really strong proponent of using virtual worlds, massive multi-user virtual environments where you create the experience. That's what I do with my kids in Second Life, and we have some teachers who have just created some amazing learning experiences with everything from body image to social studies and immigrant experiences and what have you. But that's really the environment where the teacher can come to me and say, I want a globe theater and I want the kids to perform, and we can use different things to make that happen. WoW is a different experience. WoW is a game experience. WoW is a leveling experience. WoW is a team-building, collaborative experience. The same wonderful thing happens whenever, in my experience, whenever a student functions as Avatar. The same wonderful thing happens in that there's a semblance of anonymity. And Lucas is known to have said, well, anonymity can be a good thing or a bad thing, but in most cases we find that it's a good thing. Now, the kids are not truly anonymous. Even in Second Life, the teacher knows who they are if they have chosen not to share their real-life information with their classmates. But 95% of them go into Second Life, and the first thing they do is tell each other who they are. Their avatar names have no connection to their real-life identity. And yet they still function as they go along, as they do projects. They still function under this guise of anonymity. Whereas they say things to me, they literally say things like, I'm not good at math, but my avatar is. And this is the whole psychosocial moratorium, and those of you who have heard me speak before, I speak to this at great length, but basically, go back to Eric Erickson and your one ed psych course you had to take in your undergrad work, who talked about the psychosocial moratorium being an environment that teens need to explore their personalities without the fear of consequence. And that's what happens when anyone functions as Avatar, not just teens. So you have that happening in both World of Warcraft and in other multi-user virtual environments like Quest Atlantis and Second Life and these other ones that are coming up the pipe. But the beauty of it is that the kids are given permission. They're all of a sudden allowed to be smart. They're allowed to be a scientist. They're allowed to function as a mathematician or a journalist or an architect, whereas they're not bringing in those peer pressures and those labels and those, I literally, I'm quoting a student when they said, I'm not good at math, but my avatar is. Meaning when he went into Second Life and had this math problem and this whole project to do in math, He went in with a clean perspective, a clean slate, a level playing field, and he was successful. So I think it's not in lieu of, I think both massively multiplayer online role-playing games and virtual environments such as Second Life that do not have a game engine in them, I think they both serve fantastic purposes for education.
Good. Well, if I've missed any questions, please feel free to post them again in the chat. We have probably time for one or two more. You can also raise your hand by clicking on the hand with the green up arrow that's at the bottom of the participant window.
I'd like to do a shout out, Steve, to Bron Stuckey is in the house tonight, and Bron is the international liaison for Quest Atlantis, which is another game virtual environment. It is out of Indiana University, and it is free, and you have to register as an educator, and you can bring your students in, and it's for the younger kids as well. So, you know, when my teachers came to me and said, well, what about our 6th graders? What about our 4th graders? Quest Atlantis is the way to go. And Bron, maybe you'll just post a link to the QA website, because we need to get the information out there to people that, you know, we can't keep handing these kids worksheets and textbooks and lining them up in rows, or even putting a laptop in front of them, without having something engaging and something that is collaborative and social for them in which to participate.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I would like to ask, and I don't know, I know Tripp is here still and pretty active in the conversation. And I'm not sure if Plumper Rock and Corey, if you guys are still here, but if the three of you have anything that you particularly remember, that something you felt like World of Warcraft and games and those kinds of games in general taught you, that you felt they were good at teaching, and you want to share those, just type them out in the chat room. I'd like the audience to get the student perspective as well.
So could we also give Bron the microphone for a second? Bron, if you would like to describe Quest Atlantis.
Oh, please do.
Oops. So Bron, I've given you the mic. If you're brave, feel free to turn it on, or you can put a note in the chat that you don't have a mic or you're not set up for that. To turn your mic on, you would click on the larger mic. There you go.
Can people hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, well, Quest Atlantis is a virtual world game for students aged between the ages of 9 and 16. And it's kind of where education, entertainment, and social values come together. So it's really worth exploring if you're looking at something to lead into other games, a precursor perhaps to going into other virtual worlds or into other games. It's a fantastic learning space, and it's developed by Indiana University. It has no commercial interests and comes from the best of pedagogy, inquiry learning, and I think we have, I'm looking down the list here, we have probably 10 teachers who are involved in Quest Atlantis in the group who can better speak to how well it serves in the classrooms, but certainly something worth looking at. And I'll put a few links in the chat so that people can pick up on that if they're interested. We have teacher professional development induction coming up in the next couple of weeks, so if you wanted to get this started in your school at the start of the US school year, perfect timing. And thanks for the mic.
Bron, thank you so much. So Lisa Lynn has raised her hand as well, and I'm going to turn on the telephone bridge. Lisa, are you on the telephone bridge there? If you are, we can't hear you. Barely.
Okay, now my mute's off. I didn't want to be bothering everybody with my typing noise. Yeah, my main question was, if there are students of either Lucas or Peggy in the chat room here, what was their aha moment, assuming that they hadn't any MMO or MorePeg experience prior to the WoW in School project? Did they have moments that were just ahas? That's the best way I can put it, I guess, but things that really changed their thinking about school.
I think everybody should take a look at what Corey put in chat. And Lisa, none of my WOW in School students are in here. I'm not in touch with them over the summer, which is a shame because I would have loved to have had them participate. I think the students Lucas was referring to are students he's been playing with for quite some time, not necessarily kids who are new to the WOW in School project. They're older students, I believe. Lucas, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So, Corey, you'll have to remind the group. I can't remember how long you've been out of school. Sorry. And I know Tripp is just finishing up pretty soon, I think this year, at North Carolina State University, and is going into education. And I hope that he gets a job very close by because we might be able to expand the project. Tripp was a former student, and as is Corey, and of course we all played World of Warcraft. See, that's a sort of another thing that kind of brought this on, was that when I got into this, who else was I going to play with? None of my fellow teachers down the hall, the English teacher across the hall from me would peek in when we were having discussions about virtual worlds and games and that sort of thing, and look at me like I'd grown extra eyes and that kind of thing. It was, so who else am I going to relate to but my students? Who else am I going to play with but my students? It was the only logical thing to do. And so that's kind of how it started. When I recruited people for my guild, it was my students typically. And so what it did, it gave me a real connection with those students that it's the kind of connection that a real involved coach might have, and that sort of thing where I get to know the students. The students hang out in my room. We have something to talk about, and we have a context for conversation. But it also gave me a context to say things like, hey, don't forget you have a test tomorrow. You need to go study. You need to log out, and that kind of thing. And it gave me opportunities for teachable moments that didn't necessarily relate to my curriculum, but that were things that we needed to talk about, address, and things like that. So they read their comments because they can speak volumes.
Yeah, in reference to that too, what Zoe just put in really supports that playing as a family and the discussions that would emerge from different issues that arose in game.
So I was having so much fun, I didn't even notice we went past the hour. So I'm going to clap because I think you've both done a really wonderful job here, and that's that little clapping hand at the bottom of the participant window. And unfortunately, I have a commitment tonight, so I can't hang around too much longer. But where would people go besides I guess they go to the wiki for these conversations, and is there anywhere else that you're having conversations like this if people want to keep talking?
Yeah, in Azeroth, Sisters of the Loon. Come and join the guild.
Oh, that's so good. Okay, thanks everybody for coming tonight. And next week, Marcelo Rodriguez, running a school in Brazil that I think the two of you would love, because I think they're doing all of the things in school and life that you're saying that you're hoping that the games would bring out in actual activities. So I think we're going to be switching from one end to the other, but I think the two go well together. Lucas, very nice to meet you. Peggy, so nice to have you on the show as well.
Likewise, Steve. Thanks.
Oh, thanks, Steve. My pleasure. And thanks to everyone in the audience. The chat is just, I'm catching up with it now. The chat is just fabulous. So
I'm not going to bump anybody out until you've had time to go up. And if you want to, you can go to File, Save, and you can save the chat conversation. So if you have been interested in the chat and you don't want to miss out on all of the references or texts or links there, I'll give you a minute. Go up to File, Save, and save the chat conversation. In about 3 or 4 minutes, though, I do have to kick everybody out so that the recording can post tonight. You can go to futureeducation.com, and later tonight you should be able to see the full Illuminate recording or download the MP3 file. Thanks, Peggy. Thanks, Lucas. Thanks, everybody, for coming tonight. Have a great night.
Thanks so much, Steve.
To my students who are still in the room, guys, how awesome that you guys showed up. I mean, I didn't even have to prod you or offer you gold in world to get you to come. That's awesome. Thanks for coming. So cool.
Yeah, I'll second that. Anytime the student voice is heard, it's a good day.